Shooting inside cars is always an absolute pig because I hate driving around with a car which is on a trailer because I always feel I'm up too high in the air. You got lights bristling all over it, and it's just such an artificial situation. So all we did in this is I put a camera on my knee, and we shot it without any rigs. We kept circling around the block because the sun was very low and was blasting into the car. So this is lit without any light at all, really, other than sunlight. It just means you got to get it done pretty quick, otherwise the sun keeps falling. Washington is a beautiful city, but it's also very difficult to shoot it because you've got so many departments to deal with. For obvious reasons, you've got a very strong bureaucracy and several departments to go through. Even though the Film Commission in Washington are tremendously helpful, it's still tough. Widescreen is something I nearly always favor. In fact, I've only shot one film, 185, which was The Duelists, which was my first film. But as soon as I got onto widescreen, I just liked the format. I like the proportion of the frame. Some people have a problem with filling it. I don't really. I like to place things in this visual dynamics on a widescreen. Like here's a good example of you can get her way on the right and him way on the left, and just a nice dynamic. It's a nice, seems to be more of a natural view of things, funnily enough, than 185.
Sex variety.
Specifically, the difficulties of anamorphic, which this is, widescreen is anamorphic, which means there's more glass on the front, means you tend to lose about 2 stops. So it becomes more expensive to use anamorphic because you need more lights, and more lights mean more time and more personnel. And so anamorphic is a more expensive process than 185. 185 is spherical lenses that are faster, and therefore you need less light. But they have a clarity on them in spherical, which is fine, but it's a very subtle difference. Anamorphic because you've got more glass on it, and therefore you've got a shorter depth of field, a depth of focus, which I like. I think that contributes to the visual aspects of the film. Spherical, your depth of focus is much greater, and it's a matter of preference as to whether you prefer that or not. But it's interesting that this house, this cottage, is not in the place we first shot the house. One house that we began was in another state, and it didn't suit our schedule, so we chose another cottage here to show the side of the house. So there's the magic of filmmaking. You don't have to be, locked to the absolute continuity logistics. You've really got to know how you can duck and dive and move around. So there's 2 separate houses here. Yes. I could have shot this cut to cut, covering onto me, covering on Anne, but I chose to keep it in one. I just like the idea of moving around them, which would actually remind us that, the room was filled, and therefore it puts De Haven under pressure, having those people around, because she knows that Demi is now volatile, and therefore would be dangerous to her. I always work very closely with the cameraman because I can't separate myself from the camera and making the movie process. When I first started out making movies, I was told that I couldn't really direct and operate. And so for the first 5 days on The Duelists, I had an operator who then resigned at the end of the process because I think I was tending to be a little bit overzealous, because you must remember, by the time I did a movie, I'd done 15 years of television commercials where I'd been operating myself for 15 years. And I just didn't want to start driving the bus differently. And I went back to the process of operating myself. It makes all the sense in the world, because the director ought to have a vision. If he hasn't got a vision, he shouldn't be directing. Part of that vision, we are dealing with pictures. It better be something to do with the picture, as well as the words. That's why whenever I can, I still operate. But because we tend to work at minimum 2 cameras, there's always operators there, good ones, It means just because I operate, I don't need an operator. It's crazy. On the contrary, I need a really good operator who will be very inventive, because the more inventive they are, then the less I've got to get into that area. And if I find I'm in an area where I trust somebody, in this instance my operator is Craig Hagenson, who is, I think, one of the best in the business, I tend to just have the discussion, then sit back and watch it happen. I've always said operating is one of the best jobs on the floor. It's where all the excitement happens. It happens through that lens, that viewfinder that we are now staring at, because that's the view that the operator has, is what you're staring at. And therefore, that's where the bells ring for me. And that's why I hate being taken off the camera, because I love it. But by doing that means that I work very closely with the cameraman. It doesn't slow it down. If anything, it speeds up the whole process. And I think for the most part, cameramen enjoy working with me. Although initially, I think there's a resistance and concern about the fact that I may do or get into and cross over into their area a lot. It's not true. I still expect a huge amount from a cameraman and rely on them tremendously. And Huey is one of those guys who particularly has extremely good taste and has a great eye, and also a very great technical proficiency of maintaining this certain quality. Once you say, right, we're going to go down this path, let's stay with that. That's what, a good cameraman can do, but he's also constantly got his eye on the material, and that it's right for the material as well. A cameraman is there really to interpret what his director wants, but a great cameraman can have an influence on a director who is, let's say, less knowledgeable in these areas and help tremendously. In which case, then he's got to very much take into account the story and the script. The editing process that I've tried every which way, and the editing time is the time of the editor. I've tried sitting at the back of the room and waiting, and even with today's state-of-the-art machine, as opposed to the usual, first of all, the Hollywood Moviola, then the Steenbeck, which is an editing machine. But now today you've got Lightworks, and you've got, very, very sophisticated electronic systems for the editorial process, which are much faster. It doesn't matter how fast technology moves, we still get impatient. So I tend not to sit in the editing room now. I would rather leave a great editor to it, who then, having talked to him having seen the storyboards and seen the rushes together where I select takes, I'll let him get on with it. And when he's ready, let's say on a scene or a reel, he'll say, okay, come and have a look, see where we are. Because I find the editing process is important to be able to take 2 steps back to enable you to become pragmatic. Because if you sit in the editing room, I've found you bury yourself alive, where you just start to lose the wood for the trees. And I like to separate myself from the film at that moment, let somebody else at it, and then I can come in refreshed and become completely pragmatic. The directing process has evolved with me because I started off as a designer, where I was very sophisticated in the process of designing, but I suddenly had some live BBC shows thrown at me where I was asked to direct, which is kind of, in a way, when you think about it, pretty irresponsible because they were live TV in those days. And I just took the opportunity and went for the show and had no idea what I was doing. But I had a good sense, good intuition about what to do. And one of the most agonizing parts of it was learning about rehearsal with actors in formal rehearsal rooms, where you don't get that kind of luxury in movies, even big movies. In television, it was interesting because the sets would be marked out on the floor with tape, and, they have the basic pieces of furniture, a table, a chair, a cup, a door, through which you could rehearse each scene and rehearse the play or rehearse the show. And I learned there, really. That became my drama school, in learning the formality of sitting around a table with a whole bunch of actors and talking to them and bringing everything together. It's a bit like being a cowboy, with a herd. No actors won't like to hear about themselves talk that way, and I don't mean it that way. But it's like you're really trying to bring a whole group of people and elements together at once. So you're constantly outriding as well as being inside and detailing. I keep calling it a sculptural process. It's a little bit here and it's a little bit there, and I think sometimes you do more than people realize.